Welcome everybody. This is our 13th video in our series for Chiropractic BioPhysics nonprofit. We're going through each one of our research publications in a video presentation format, and hopefully you've enjoyed these. We're going to continue this, and we're going to continue discussing our research involving the front view of the cervical spine, or head and neck sideways or lateral head shifts. Technically we call them lateral head translations, but a synonym would be just offset or lateral shifting of the head and neck. We have a couple more projects we want to go through on this particular issue. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. So our week 13 video is a kinematics or biomechanics investigation of head and neck movement and how it affects the cervical spine on front view radiographs. This paper came out in the year 2000 out of a very famous biomechanical journal out of the UK. It's called Clinical Biomechanics. So this paper was published in 2000. It's volume 15, page 436 through 440. The title of the paper is Cervical Coupling During Lateral Head Translations Creates an S-Curve, by my favorite lead author. If you haven't guessed, that's me. And then my CBP research colleagues, including my late father, Dr. Don Harrison, the famous MD physiatrist Rene Caillet, and then my dad's PhD advisor, Dr. Tad Yannick. This particular project was my personal idea to investigate how these sideways displacements look on an X-ray. Like, of interest, what I see on an X-ray or what I see in a patient condition will dictate what I will do from a clinical perspective. So we don't just do the same thing to every patient out there. That doesn't make sense. In the technique Chiropractic Biophysics, our interventions are distinctly determined from our analysis of the patient, both their presenting condition, their pain, health status, disability, their posture, and of course their X-ray and movement assessments. So this particular project is very important because it'll help me determine how to proceed clinically. If a given posture looks a certain way on an X-ray, I need to know that. That way I know what to look for. I know the normal situation. If a given posture and an X-ray don't match, then now I've got something that is maybe, perhaps more serious. I might have spine fractures, I might have instabilities, dislocations, I might have certain malformations in the joint. So I've got to pay attention to these things. So this particular project, what we did is we took 20 healthy subjects, volunteers, and all of our projects in the peer-reviewed research, when we use normal subjects, we have an institutional review board. So we have an IRB, and that board approves or denies our project based on the ethics. So all of our projects that we go through, just as a background, when it's published in the literature, if these are clinical trials or investigations, we have IRB approval. So there's informed consent, and we follow all ethics in research. So what we did is we took 3 X-rays on each of the 20 people. We did a neutral X-ray, and then we did a maximum left sideways translation X-ray, and then a maximum right side translation X-ray. So we had a special frame. I don't have a photo of that in this presentation, but we had a frame that would fix the patient's rib cage or the volunteer's rib cage in the center of the X-ray, and then they would voluntarily shift their head left and right. And then we took X-rays. Now we're taking the X-ray to determine a couple things. Number one, what is the range of motion of a typical person for this movement? So how far can they go left and right? Nobody had ever investigated that before. The other thing is we want to see what is the actual neck vertebra displacements due to this individual posture. So we're trying to look at this from a kinematic point of view. What are the movements of the spine? So once we have the X-ray, then yours truly gets to sit down and digitize each point of the vertebra C3 through T4, and then we have a computer code that will look at the different displacements. Now, to begin, we chose C3 to C4 because on this film, you can't see the upper neck. You can't see the base of the skull and what we call C1 and the top of C2. So we were only able to digitize C up to C3. So then we have to look at a different project to see exactly what happens with the top of the cervical spine. But we have an estimate of what goes on. These are the possible movements that we're interested in looking at on the front view X-ray. We have sideways translation. Can the vertebra do that, and how far? We have lateral tilting, called lateral flexion. Can the vertebra do that, and how far each direction? And then we have y-axis rotation or twisting about gravity. Will the vertebra do that, and how far? So these are our possible movements. We don't really know which ones are going to occur until we do the project. So the results. The range of motion is considerable. The average subject could translate approximately 30 to 31 millimeters each direction. So I can go 30 to 31 millimeters to the left and 30 to 31 millimeters to the right. And I say 30 to 31 because you'll see left was 30 and right was 31. Now this is C3 to T4. If I go up to the top of the neck at C1, you're likely going to see a few more millimeters in offset, and I'll explain why that would occur. So this is a considerable movement. There's a couple things we can gain from this. Not only understanding the allowable range of motion, but now when I see a patient and they present to me in their neutral posture, if they have a certain displacement, I can look at that relative to the known range of motion, and I can determine, is this a large posture, or is this a medium-sized posture, or is it a smaller posture? So this helps me determine how bad a patient might be, and I'll show you some examples, and you'll see sometimes people are really bad off. Their head and neck are near the end range of motion for this posture. Okay, so 30 to 31 millimeters. And if you look at the standard deviation tells me how close approximately 2/3 of my subjects are to each other. So if I look at a standard deviation of plus or minus what we call 3.3 or 3.2 millimeters, that's really small. That means 2/3 of my 20 subjects sit inside 30 to 31 millimeters plus or minus 3. This is a very narrow distribution, so it tells me the average person could go about the same distance, okay? Now, the movements that were allowed of interest, the primary motion we found was not sideways shifting. The vertebrae don't have a great deal of lateral shear or translation. They're only allowed to do about 1 millimeter in the neck. So what we identified, the major movement was actually tilting angles. Okay, so this is what we call rotation about the z-axis or lateral tilting, bending left and right. And here's what we identified. The upper segments that we could digitize or analyze bent the opposite way from the mid and lower segments. So you'll see I have two different areas circled. Those areas are going different directions from each other. So C3 and C4 tilt the same way, and then C5 down tilt the opposite way. So what we have is opposing bending angles. And if you look at this as links in a chain, if some of the links bend this way, and then the other links bend back the other way, we'll get a horizontal offset. So we get a linear distance that's created by bending angles of interest. And so we looked at this and we said this appears to be a type of S-curve or S configuration. The segments are going opposite directions. Now what we also want to do is we want to see what segments have the greatest movement. And you'll notice right in the mid and low cervical spine and then the upper segments, that's where the greatest movement is. Okay, so I expect to see more movement from C3 to about C5. That's typical. So this also gives me information on, is a patient behaving or their spine behaving as it should for this style of posture or this type of postural displacement. Okay, so these aren't just numbers, these are clinically significant if you know how to process them. So here's the displacement that we're interested in, my horizontal side shift. So I see this in a patient's cervical spine. I see that the center of mass of their head is shifted to one side. In this case, it's the patient shifting to the right. Well, we're going to x-ray that person, and we're going to see what does their spine look like. So here's what the spine should do. We see these opposing bending angles. You'll see that the lower neck will bend to the side that the head translates or shifts to. So in this case, I'm looking at this from behind. The person's head is to the right. What will happen is the mid and low neck will bend to the right side. And then you can see, here's C2, here's C3, here's C4. C3 and C4 start to bend back the other direction. Okay, so we're now seeing the shift in the direction occur in this animation. And of interest, we programmed this animation based on the results from this particular project. So again, this is what it looks like. Okay. Now also, you'll note that the further the head goes, the greater the bending angles are. So if I stop this animation at only a really small posture, you'll only see slight angles. But if I allow it to continue to translate to its end, you'll see now my bending angles are larger. So the size of the bending angles, or what we would call a scoliotic angle on the x-ray, is driven by how far your posture is displaced. Okay, so our results are clinically relevant. This matches what we see in patient populations. So here's a volunteer, my younger sister. She loves it when I use her as the model. Really enjoys that, by the way. These are old photos of her when she was about 18 or 19, and they just automatically show up on YouTube and Google and all this stuff. And I'll get some nice emails and such from my younger sister. It's kind of interesting. Forgive me, Stephanie. And of course, I just said your name, so now everybody knows it. Now back to this. Here's the animation that we program. This is what the static alignment should look like. Okay, so this is what I'm expecting to see on the x-ray. Now the skeleton animation is, pure program, and then this is an actual representative case. Okay, so what I look for is I look for the pattern. I see C4 is bending the opposite direction of C5. So here's 4 and 5, and then I see 3 is bending in the same direction, but a little bit more as compared to C4. And then if you'll note, even in this case, we can see cervical vertebra number 2, although in our project we didn't actually analyze it. On many of the x-rays you can see it. So you can see that C2 is also going along the same line as C3 is. However, if you look, C2 is further off midline as compared to C3. So our range of motion was 30 to 31 millimeters to C3. If I go to C2, it's probably going to be more like 34 or 35 millimeters as a maximum range of motion. Then if I go in the lower neck, C5 all the way down, you'll see that the lower neck will bend to the side the head is shifted towards. So I see a tilt angle towards the head shift posture, and then C4 will bend back the other way. So I look for this pattern. Now, the astute clinician out there, you'll see a little bit of y-axis rotation of these spinous processes in the mid and upper cervical spine. We didn't find that the spinuses truly rotated. Now, they will look like they were rotated because it's a complex projection problem on an x-ray. What you have to realize is we are three-dimensional objects. When you take an x-ray, you're compressing that flat onto a plane. So you can't truly see what's happening in 3D. So we know this, and we have a program that calculates the apparent offset of the spinous process of the vertebra in rotation versus the actual rotation. And what we found out is the actual rotation during this movement is less than 1 degree. So even though you see a little bit of the spinuses going towards the midline, they don't actually do that. Okay, this is important because if you actually see some of these spinuses that are truly significantly rotated towards the midline, and I'll show you an example of that, this indicates we've got a problem. We've either got a problem with neck injury, or we've got a problem with multiple postures, not just a simple posture like this, or we have a problem with the way the x-ray was taken. Okay, and I'll explain that as we go. Okay, so lateral head translations, what did we actually find in our patterns? Now, remember, a couple weeks ago, we looked at the line drawing, we looked at the reliability of our lines. We had to do that project before we do this project. Okay, so we now know our lines and our angles and distances that we get, these are highly reliable. We have excellent inter and intra-examiner reliability. So I'm interested in the horizontal offset. In this case, it's 13 millimeters from the top of the neck to the bottom of the neck or the upper thoracic spine. Now, this is not somebody in our project. Remember, the average person could go about 30 to 31 millimeters. This is an actual patient. They have 13 millimeters offset. We're interested in the mid-neck angle, So my angle right here that's created by my opposing bending angles, this mid-neck angle says it's 8 degrees. I'm also then interested in the low neck tilt angle. This one says 9 degrees. So I have a low neck tilt to vertical and a mid-neck tilt angle, and those two angles are created by this horizontal offset, or the tilting angles create the horizontal offset itself. Okay, either way, this is driven by a head posture of left and right translation. Okay, what I expect to see is a certain pattern. I expect that my mid-neck angle, so if I look at this mid-neck angle, 8 degrees, it's roughly going to be, depending on the patient, 40 to 60% of the distance that their head shifted. So I look at this 13 millimeters and I see 8 degrees. That's on the high end of normal. It's still within normal limits, but it's on the high end of normal. So I'm not overtly concerned about like trauma in the cervical spine, like the joints being truly injured, like ligament damage. However, this is a complex posture where the person, their head and neck are stuck in this position. And over time, that angle might actually get bigger. And if you look at what we did last week in week 12, we've shown over time, these things might actually get worse in patient populations, okay? So 8 degrees, roughly 60% of that 13 millimeters. And then approximately the same for this angle here, 9 degrees. Now that's a little bit bigger, even though it's only 1 degree bigger than the mid-neck angle. It's not necessarily, 60%. It's a little higher than I would like to see. What that indicates is my upper thoracic area, my upper shoulder area is likely tilting too much for this particular posture. I need to make a note of that as a clinician. I look at the patient and I say, that upper thoracic or low neck tilt angle is a little bit bigger than should be for this type of posture, meaning that the shoulders themselves might have a displacement that I have to consider in this person. Okay, so this is my summary. It says the pattern depends on the exact magnitude of movement. How far did I move? The mid-neck angle is roughly 40 to 60% of the translation distance. And it says here, if you add the two angles together, even though they're going in opposite directions, if you take their absolute value, just the raw number, not the plus and minus, but the raw number, you add them together, they should be close to the translation distance. So 8 degrees and 9 degrees is 17 degrees. That's a little bit too much for my 13 millimeters. It should actually be a little bit less than that 17 degrees. It should be close to 13 millimeters. Okay, what this indicates to me again is I have a little tilting in the shoulder area that's likely contributing to this. So this is the clinical application of the information that we identified in this project. Okay, so discussion and limitations. We didn't actually study the person through their full range of motion. What we did is took a neutral and then a maximum left and a maximum right. So what we have to do is infer what happens in between. So future projects are warranted. Somebody could take a motion x-ray and you could investigate the whole sequence of movement as the person does this. However, we know that the spine is likely going to behave like we just presented to you. The magnitude of the displacement is going to dictate the magnitude of the angles. So as you move further, the angles are going to tilt more. Okay? We know that that's going to occur, but somebody should still investigate that. If you want an interesting project to do out there, if you're a young researcher, this is a nice kinematic project to do. Okay? The other issue is we investigated in range of motion, so we do have to infer what this looks like in a patient's neutral resting x-ray, but we can get estimates and ideas, and we can apply this information. So for example, the x-ray on the left, this is the one I just showed you. I would think that this is mostly a simple translation. There's likely a little bit of upper thoracic bending like I shared with you in the previous slide. Okay? However, mostly this is driven by a head translation. If I come over to this other x-ray, this one is much different. Now, number one, this is a neutral x-ray of a real patient. This is not one of our normal subjects. This person stands like this. This is what they think is normal, okay? I'm gonna show you a case study next week on this very person, okay? So this is the person's neutral posture. Look at this, 31 millimeters offset. What does that mean to you? You know what? If I look at this other person that's 13, I go 13 millimeters compared to 31 maximum of the range of motion. The person's about 40% displaced inside their range of motion, okay, roughly. If I go over to this other one, 31, what is that? That's their in range of motion. They're stuck like that. That means somebody had such a bad problem with their neck, their head and neck are shifted as far as it can go, 31 millimeters, and it's stuck like that. This is the application of this information. You don't just go, oh, it's only 31 millimeters off. No, it's at its limit. It's stuck at its limit. This person has serious problems. That's the perspective, you know. Sometimes you get a little excited, that way it makes a point for you, and you'll remember, this person is really bad off. They are stuck at their end range of motion, okay? The other problem is, look at my mid-neck angle. My mid-neck angle is 20 degrees. That's really high. My low neck angle is 16 degrees. That's also really high. Typically, a simple translation, it's not going to give you angles in the mid-neck that are much bigger than 10 to 12 degrees. So when you see something that's 20 degrees, you got to go, whoa, this person has a very, very significant displacement. The other issue is, if you'll note, the doctors will pick this up easier than a patient out there. These are my spinous processes. My spinous processes should not be this far towards the midline. We have a problem. So now we see a big twist in these vertebrae. They're not supposed to be twisted that far. They're supposed to be closer to the midline on this red line for this particular posture. These are way over here. So there's some kind of issue going on. Now, what is it? Well, maybe it's an artifact of the X-ray positioning technique. If the person was slightly twisted relative to the X-ray when the examiner took the film, that can explain some of it. The other thing is, this could be a true cervical thoracic scoliosis that we have to worry about. Now, I'm going to share this case with you for next week. We'll go through that and I'll talk to you about what that really is. For right now, I'll give you a hint. What I need to do is look at my upper thoracic vertebra, and I look at my clavicles, okay, my shoulder clavicle area, and I look at my rib area. And if those are offset, if they're not in the center of my film, and if the vertebra is not in the center of those, the chances are when we took the X-ray, the examiner made an error. They actually positioned the person with a little twist relative to the X-ray. And when you do that, you'll get an oblique angle, and you can see you're kind of oblique to my spine. That explains some of what we're seeing on this film, but not all of it. So we'll go through that for next week for this particular case. Now, I said to you the findings that we see in this kinematic experiment will dictate what we do, and that's absolutely true. If I look at somebody's posture and I see a head translation, and then I look at their X-ray and it matches the pattern of these opposite lateral bending angles that we see, and the angles are within the values that they should be for the distances, that tells me that this is a pretty straightforward postural problem. It doesn't mean it's good for you. It means it's a pretty easy case from the perspective of I can correct this without, creating some, fun situations for the patient to do and for me to do. And what we do is we call this mirror image intervention. Mirror image means whatever you have, we just reverse it and do the opposite. So if your head's translated to the left, we're going to translate you to the right. So I'm showing some examples on this slide. This right here is a mirror image type of exercise. If her head was translated to the right, we would exercise her head to the left. And you can see the model, my sister, she's not really being a very good, model for this. If you look carefully, she's rotated her head a bit. She's rotated to the right. You don't necessarily want that. You want a pure translation or sideways shift. So we have to teach and train the patients to do this. You should do it under supervision. You should look at yourself in the mirror and make sure that you're doing a pure linear movement. So she's close, but not exactly right. The head is rotating a little bit. And then here's me, back in my younger days. You can see my belly was a little smaller and I had more hair, right? So this is about 10 years ago. This is what we call a mirror image adjustment, where we lie you on the opposite side of your head translation. So if you're translated to the right, we're going to translate you to the left. So we lay on your left side and we shift your head and neck down. And I'm going to adjust you with a chiropractic table. It's called mirror image adjusting, opposite postural adjusting. And then everybody's favorite, mirror image traction. You can see how excited Stephanie, my younger sister, is about this, right? Look at her. She's thrilled, right? Like, geez, Stephanie, can you smile? I'm going to show these. She's like, no, don't show anybody. I said, don't worry, I won't show a soul, right? Just makes it in YouTube. Traction is where we translate somebody's head over to the side, hold you there for a period of minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. It's not painful, okay? It's just holding your head, sliding it over, and then maintaining it in that position so it stretches the soft tissues. That's called traction. Now, if you look, I've got this little acronym up here. EAT, it spells EAT. Exercise, adjust, and traction. That's what we do, okay? That's the clinical application of this work when the posture matches the x-ray. So as an example of this, 21 millimeter horizontal offset or translation. This person has a 10-degree mid-neck angle and a 13-degree low neck angle. That's 23 if I add 10 and 13. That's really close to the 21 millimeters. That tells me I'm dealing with a translation, okay? And then what I do is I look at that clinically, I go, oh, their head posture is translated, it matches the x-ray, it matches the study here that we've just determined from clinical biomechanics. Pretty straightforward case. I do my mirror image exercise, adjust, and traction. And I have to do it more than once. You're not just going to get this to change in one day. It takes a program of care. You're looking at about a 9 to 12 week program where you're going to do these things with a chiropractor 3 to 4 times a week. So you're looking at about 36 to 40 sessions. And then here's our reevaluation x-ray. This is the same patient, and you'll see it's considerably better. It's not perfect, but it's reducing, you know. So in about 36 to 40 visits, we've got this about 40%, maybe 45% improved. This is right on track. This is how we manage a translation. You know, if you're a patient out there with a head translation, it's not a quick fix. You're not just going to do this one time and, you know, realign your spine. The spine is a very complex structure. You know, it kills me. Patients go, oh, you know, can't you just quickly align me? Give me, you know, pop, pop, and it lines right up. And I go, no, it doesn't work that way. Think about braces. Think about a crooked tooth. If you push one time on a crooked tooth, does it line up? No way, it doesn't. You've got tissue in there holding it. Right? You have to wear braces that deform the teeth and the tissue back towards normal. It takes 1 to 2, sometimes 3 or 4 years. Your spine is similar to the teeth. You cannot realign this in just one quick session. It doesn't work that way. Ligaments and muscles, they don't respond that way. So this is a program of care, right? So this is the clinical application of this work, right? So conclusion from our research project, with some clinical things thrown in. I went through the clinical side of it because I want to make it relevant to you and not just look at data from the project. Lateral head translations can be a significantly large movement, a mean value of 31 millimeters to each side. Now that's from C3 to T4. If I go up to C1 or C2, it's likely going to be a few more millimeters, like 35 millimeters. The major spine movement was lateral bending angles. These change directions at the C4, C5 disc space, creating an S type of configuration. S, we meant the low neck bends one way, the upper neck bends the other way, so we get this kink angle. It's like an S curve. And then we also said in this project at the end, this in theory could have implications in side impacts, whether it's a side motor vehicle collision where you know, you're going through an intersection and somebody else forgot to slow down and stop and bam, they hit you from the side, the T-bone. Theoretically, this posture can be created by that. Similarly, what if I fell on my shoulder area? So I fall and I land on my shoulder and my head slams sideways, right? That's side impacts, right? So we concluded that in 2000. And of interest, I want to show you a project that came out in 2006. 6 years later, these authors actually studied, investigated, and found exactly what we said they would. It's really interesting how, when you do your experiment, you say, well, here's future projects and here's the relevance of this. And then other researchers, maybe they didn't read your project, maybe they did, but they get a similar idea, and then it actually establishes validity or credibility for your past project when they find similar results. So this came out in Medical Engineering and Physics in the year 2000. And I don't have the volume and page numbers, sorry about that, but you can look it up. Okay, it's by Teo et al., T-E-O, Finite Element Analysis of the Head and Neck Kinematics During Motor Vehicle Accidents. Now, they analyzed in their model of the human head and neck with muscle actions, etc. They analyzed different vectors of impact. So they did a true front collision, they did a front side, they did a true side, T-bone, rear side, and rear end. So they did 5 simulated impacts. Now, in their more oblique vectored or true side impact, not the true front, what they found was your spine will create an S-curve configuration. Here's what they identified. Under the side impact, the simulation showed that the head and neck exhibits an S-shaped. That's what we said. And then a C-shaped curve. But first, it's the S-shape. So here's what happens. Initially, the upper cervical segments bend away from the side of impact. Okay? What that means, you get hit on the right side, your upper segments are going to bend to the left. I'll make sense of this in a second for you. The lower segments bend towards the impact. So I get hit on the right, my lower segments will bend to the right. Twisting will occur, but later on. So here's my analysis in the early phases. They showed the upper segments bend away from the direction of impact, and then the lower segments bend in the direction of impact. What that means is when you get hit from the right side, it means that your car slides to the left. Your torso, because you're in the car seat and the seat belt's coming across you, your trunk, your rib cage, torso shifts to the left because you got hit on the right side. Your head has what we call a moment of inertia. It wants to stay where it is. Now, because it's not in contact with the seat or the seat belt, it stays over to the right as your car is sliding to the left. That creates a right head translation, head relative to your rib cage, such that the lower segments bend to the side of the impact, that's the side of head translation, and the upper segments bend away from the side of impact. That's due to the head translation, okay? So we look at the simulation. This is what the neck will do under a side impact, at least in the early phases. You're stuck with an S-curve in your neck. This can actually correlate to the injury that was created in the neck. When your neck rapidly does this, you got to realize you're going to injure and irritate the joints, the ligaments, the muscles, etc. So this is a bad deal. This is likely where these head translations come from. As an example of this, here's a real patient that we had that was in a side impact. This guy had major pain and disability, 25 millimeters offset. That's almost at his end range of motion. That's 80% of the end range of motion, right? You do the math. That's 80% of the end range of motion. His mid-neck angle is actually a little smaller than the translation would dictate. That's actually a nice thing for him. And then the upper back angle is about what it should be. Now this person's head is way off center, and you'll notice they have an opposite rotation in here too. That indicates that the side impact likely created an oblique turn as well. So this is the clinical relevance of this information. All right, that's the end of this week's presentation. Our study clinical biomechanics in the year 2000 on kinematics of left and right head translation. The kinematics are, it creates opposite lateral bending angles. It creates an S-curve. It has a maximum range of motion of about 30 to 31 millimeters. The change in direction occurs at the C4, C5 disc space. Okay? The mid-neck and upper neck should have the largest bending angles. The mid-neck angle itself should be about 40 to 60% of the translation distance. Okay? This is our summary. This is a major issue when we look at head and neck trauma. This is a very relevant posture and kinematic issue to look at. So thank you for your time and attention, and what we'll look at in next week's video presentation is intervention and treatment for somebody with a very large and actually abnormal head and neck translation. Thank you very much. If you like this information, if you're a patient, you need to go to a chiropractic biophysics trained chiropractor. You can find us all over the United States, Canada, and international locations. Go to www.cbppatient.com and look up CBP providers in your area. It's an easy to use, user-friendly site. Search for, at first, a general or advanced trained CBP chiropractor. If you can't find one of those, then find somebody that's at least on the directory and has taken our courses and that does the work, okay? So let's go to a CBP trained chiropractor, www.cbppatient.com. If you're a chiropractor and you're interested in this, either learning more about it or maybe it's brand new to you and this particular video research project intrigues you, come to our website for doctors. Go to idealspine.com. We've got a lot of things there for you. We've got training, we've got conferences, we've got products. Love to have you on board and become one of the CBP doctor family providers, right? We need your help. There's patients out there that need you, and if you don't get trained in this work, then you're not going to be able to provide them the type of service that we think you should be providing them from a corrective care point of view. Also, lastly, anybody out there, we also need your help to continue to do research investigations like this, right? These are time and dollar consuming projects. If you will, go to our website directly and sponsor and support Chiropractic Biophysics nonprofit. Make a donation of any amount to us. Also, you can do it indirectly on Amazon Smile. Just select Chiropractic Biophysics as your nonprofit foundation, and when you purchase through Amazon Smile and Amazon, CBP nonprofit will get 0.5% of all your purchases, which is a big deal. It adds up. Translation. Thank you very much.